The morning started like any other in the Arizona territory. Elena McCarthy was hanging clothes on the line behind their small wooden cabin when she heard the thunder of horses. At first, she thought it might be her father returning early from checking the cattle. But something felt wrong. The sound was too loud, too many horses moving too fast. She dropped the wet shirt she was holding and ran toward the house. Her mother, Catherine, was already at the window, her face pale as fresh snow. Through the dusty glass, they could see riders approaching fast across the desert landscape. The sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows that made the horsemen look like dark spirits racing toward them. "Elena, get your brother," her mother whispered, her voice shaking. "Get him now and hide in the root cellar." 10-year-old Tommy was feeding the chickens near the barn, completely unaware of the danger heading their way. Elena ran toward him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The riders were getting closer now, and she could see they were Apache warriors, their faces painted for war. "Tommy," she called out, trying to keep her voice calm so she wouldn't scare him. "Come here, we need to go inside," but it was too late. The warriors surrounded their homestead like wolves circling prey. Elena grabbed Tommy's hand and pulled him behind the chicken coop, hoping they might hide there until the danger passed. Through the wooden slats, she watched as the Apache dismounted and spread out around their property. Their leader was a tall, powerful man with strong shoulders and intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore traditional Apache clothing mixed with pieces taken from other raids, a cavalry belt here, a settler's hat there. But it was his presence that commanded attention. Even from her hiding spot, Elena could feel the authority that radiated from him like heat from a fire. The man she would later know as Ayanna raised his hand, and his warriors stopped moving. For a moment, everything was silent except for the wind blowing through the desert brush. Then he spoke in Apache to his men, his voice deep and commanding. Elena's father, Patrick, came running from the far pasture where he had been mending fence. He saw the warriors and reached for the rifle he always carried, but he was outnumbered 20-1, and everyone knew it. Still, he raised his weapon, ready to defend his family even if it meant his death. "Stay away from my family," Patrick shouted, his Irish accent thick with fear and determination. Ayanna looked at the white man with something that might have been respect. Here was a man willing to die for those he loved. The Apache understood such courage even in an enemy. But this land had been Apache territory for hundreds of years before any white settlers arrived. And these people had built their home on sacred ground near a water source his people desperately needed. What happened next would haunt Elena for the rest of her life. The attack was swift and decisive. Her father fought bravely but was quickly overwhelmed. Her mother tried to run to him but was caught before she could reach his side. Tommy broke free from Elena's grip and ran toward their parents, crying for them in his small, frightened voice. Elena watched in horror as her entire world crumbled in a matter of minutes. The family that had loved her, protected her, and planned a future with her was gone. She was alone, crouched behind a chicken coop in the middle of the desert with Apache warriors all around her. She thought they hadn't seen her. She thought maybe she could hide until they left, then figure out what to do next. But Ayanna had noticed everything, including the young woman with golden hair who was trying to make herself invisible behind the wooden structure. He walked over to where she was hiding, his moccasins making no sound on the hard-packed earth. When Elena looked up and saw him standing there, she thought her heart might stop beating altogether. Up close, he was even more imposing. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel like he could see right into her soul. "Stand up," he said in English, his accent thick but his words clear. Elena's legs shook as she rose to her feet. She was tall for a woman, but he still towered over her. She had heard stories about what happened to white women captured by Apache raiders. Some said they were killed quickly. Others whispered about fates worse than death. She tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming, but Ayanna surprised her. Instead of violence, he looked at her with something like curiosity. Here was a white girl, probably 16 or 17 years old, who had shown courage by trying to protect her younger brother. She hadn't screamed or fainted like some white women did. She had acted with intelligence, trying to hide and keep her brother safe. "You will come with us," he told her simply. Elena found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Please just let me bury them. Let me say goodbye." Ayanna considered this request. It showed respect for family, something Apache culture valued deeply. After a moment, he nodded and gestured to his men to wait. Elena moved like someone walking through a bad dream. She gathered her family together and said words over them that her mother had taught her from the Bible. Her tears fell onto the dusty ground as she whispered promises to never forget them, and to someday make their deaths mean something. When she finished, Ayana handed her a water container and pointed toward the horses. "We go now," he said. Elena looked back at the only home she had ever known, the cabin her father had built with his own hands, the garden where her mother grew vegetables, the tree where Tommy had carved his initials just last week. Everything that had made her who she was lay behind her in the dust. She climbed onto the horse Ayana indicated, her whole body numb with shock and grief. As they rode away from the homestead, she turned for one last look. Smoke was beginning to rise from the cabin. Soon there would be nothing left to show that the McCarthy family had ever lived there at all. The Apache warriors rode hard toward the mountains, and Elena held on tight to the horse's mane. The desert landscape blurred past her as they climbed higher into rocky territory she had never seen before. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, and the familiar sights of the valley floor disappeared behind them. Hours passed before they finally stopped to rest. Elena's body ached from the unfamiliar riding position, and her throat was dry despite the water Ayana had given her. She sat apart from the warriors, unsure of what was expected of her and afraid to do anything wrong. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Elena realized that her old life was truly over. Everything she had known, everyone she had loved, was gone forever. Whatever lay ahead of her in the Apache camp, she was no longer Elena McCarthy, the Irish settler's daughter. She was something else now, something undefined and uncertain. Ayana watched her from across their small camp, seeing the moment when acceptance began to replace shock in her green eyes. This white girl would need to be strong to survive what was coming, but something told him she had that strength inside her, waiting to be discovered. The Apache camp sat hidden in a canyon that seemed carved from the mountains themselves. Elena had never seen anything like it. Tall red rocks rose on all sides, creating natural walls that protected the settlement from view and attack. Springs bubbled up from the ground, providing fresh water, and ancient trees offered shade from the blazing desert sun. As they rode into camp, Elena felt dozens of eyes watching her. Apache women stopped their work to stare at the white girl who had been brought into their sacred space. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, curious but cautious. The men who had stayed behind to guard the camp studied her with expressions that ranged from suspicion to outright hostility. An elderly woman with silver-streaked hair and intricate tattoos on her chin approached them. Her name was Nieli, and Elena would later learn she was Ayana's aunt and one of the most respected elders in the tribe. She spoke rapidly in Apache to Ayana, gesturing toward Elena. Even without understanding the words, Elena could tell the conversation was about her, and that not everyone was happy about her presence. Ayana dismounted and helped Elena down from her horse. Her legs were so stiff from the long ride that she nearly fell when her feet touched the ground. Several Apache women laughed at her clumsiness, and Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and shame. "You stay with Nieli," Ayana told her in his careful English. "She will teach you what you need to know." The old woman looked Elena up and down with sharp, evaluating eyes. She said something in Apache that made the other women chuckle. Then she grabbed Elena's arm with surprising strength and led her toward a shelter made of brush and animal hides. Inside the simple dwelling, Nieli handed Elena a bowl of water and some kind of flat bread. The food was different from anything Elena had ever tasted, but she was so hungry she ate it gratefully. The old woman watched her eat, occasionally making comments in Apache that Elena couldn't understand but that didn't sound particularly friendly. That first night was the longest of Elena's life. She lay on a mat made of woven grass, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Apache camp. People talked in low voices around cooking fires. Dogs barked in the distance. Somewhere a baby cried until its mother sang it back to sleep with a beautiful, haunting melody that made Elena think of her own mother's lullabies. She cried silently into the rough blanket Nieli had given her, trying to muffle the sound so no one would hear her weakness. Everything she had lost felt overwhelming in the darkness. Her family's faces appeared in her mind every time she closed her eyes, making sleep impossible. The next morning brought new challenges. Elena woke to find the Apache women already busy with their daily work. They were preparing food, tending children, making clothes, and maintaining their shelters. Everyone had a job, everyone had a purpose, and Elena had no idea where she fit into any of it. Nayeli appeared with a basket and motioned for Elena to follow her. They walked to an area where several women were gathering plants and roots. The old woman began showing Elena which plants were good for eating, which ones could be used for medicine, and which ones to avoid because they were poisonous. At first, Elena tried to pay attention, but everything looked the same to her. The Apache women could identify dozens of different plants that all appeared identical to Elena's untrained eyes. When she picked the wrong plant for the third time, one of the younger women said something sharp in Apache that made the others laugh. Elena didn't need a translation to know she was being mocked, but Nayeli surprised her by snapping back at the younger woman with words that were clearly a scolding. The laughter stopped immediately and the work continued in uncomfortable silence. Elena realized that despite her gruff manner, the old woman was protecting her in her own way. Days turned into weeks, and Elena slowly began to adapt to mountain life. She learned to identify edible plants and to prepare them the Apache way. She discovered which water sources were safe to drink from, and which paths through the rocky terrain were easiest to navigate. Her soft hands became calloused from gathering wood and working with rough materials. The Apache children were the first to accept her presence. Unlike the adults who remembered years of conflict with white settlers, the children were naturally curious about this strange woman with pale skin and golden hair. They would sneak close to watch her work, giggling and running away when she looked at them. One day, a little girl named Ayana approached Elena while she was trying to weave a basket. The child's technique was far superior to Elena's clumsy attempts, and she began showing Elena how to hold the fibers correctly. Soon, several children had gathered around, all eager to teach the white woman their skills. Elena found herself smiling for the first time since her capture. These children reminded her of her brother Tommy, with their bright eyes and endless energy. She began picking up Apache words from them, starting with simple things like water and food and thank you. But her real test came during a flash flood that struck the canyon without warning. Elena was gathering firewood near the stream when she heard the roar of rushing water echoing off the canyon walls. A wall of muddy water came thundering down the narrow channel, carrying rocks and debris with terrifying force. She saw immediately that little Ayana was in danger. The child had been playing too close to the water's edge and was now trapped on a small island of rock as the floodwaters rose around her. The current was too strong for the girl to swim to safety, and the Apache adults were too far away to reach her in time. Elena didn't think about the danger to herself. She had grown up near streams and rivers in Ireland before her family immigrated to America. She understood how water moved and where the currents would be weakest. Without hesitation, she waded into the rushing flood. The water was shockingly cold and powerful, trying to knock her off her feet with every step. But Elena kept her balance and worked her way carefully toward the trapped child. She grabbed Ayana just as the rock the girl was standing on began to crumble into the flood. Fighting against the current, Elena carried the child to safety on higher ground. By the time they reached the bank, a crowd of Apache adults had gathered, including the girl's frantic mother and Ayana himself. The woman snatched her daughter into her arms, speaking rapidly in Apache while tears streamed down her face. Ayana looked at Elena with new respect. This white woman had risked her own life to save an Apache child, someone she barely knew. It was an act of pure courage and compassion that spoke to values the Apache understood and honored. From that day forward, Elena's position in the camp began to change. The women still watched her carefully, but the hostility was replaced by cautious acceptance. Some even began teaching her more complex skills, like how to properly tan hides and make strong rope from plant fibers. Elena discovered she had a natural ability for learning languages, and her Apache vocabulary grew rapidly. Soon she could have basic conversations with the other women, though her grammar was still rough and her accent made them smile. But they appreciated her effort to learn their ways rather than stubbornly clinging to her old life. The mountains themselves began to feel less foreign and more like a refuge. Elena learned to read the weather by watching how clouds moved across the peaks. She discovered hidden springs and secret paths that offered shortcuts through the rocky terrain. The harsh landscape that had once seemed impossible to survive in was revealing its secrets to her, one lesson at a time. Most importantly, She began to understand why the Apache fought so fiercely to protect this land. It wasn't just their home, it was their mother, their provider, their sacred connection to the world of spirits and ancestors. Every rock and tree had meaning. Every stream and meadow held stories passed down through generations. Elena still grieved for her lost family and the life she would never return to. But she was beginning to see that survival might be possible in this strange new world. The Apache way of life demanded strength, intelligence, and adaptability, qualities she was discovering she possessed in greater measure than she had ever imagined. 3 months had passed since Elena first arrived in the mountain camp, and the seasons were beginning to change. The intense heat of summer was giving way to cooler days and cold nights that required warmer clothing and different survival strategies. Elena had learned to prepare for these changes the Apache way, gathering special plants and materials that would be needed when winter arrived. Her Apache language skills had improved dramatically during this time. She could now hold conversations with most of the women in camp, though she sometimes still struggled with complex ideas or cultural concepts that had no equivalent in English. The children had been her best teachers, patient with her mistakes and delighted when she learned new words correctly. Nayeli had become something like a grandmother to her, strict but caring in her own gruff way. The old woman taught Elena not just practical skills but also the deeper meanings behind Apache customs and traditions. She explained how every daily activity was connected to spiritual beliefs that honored the land, the animals, and the ancestors who had lived here before them. White people take from the earth, Nayeli told her one morning as they gathered medicinal herbs. They dig and cut and build without asking permission. Apache people know the earth is alive. We ask before we take. We give back when we can. Elena was beginning to understand these concepts, though they were very different from the way she had been raised. Her family had been good people, but they had viewed the land as something to be conquered and controlled. The Apache saw themselves as part of nature, not separate from it. It was during this time that Ayana began teaching Elena more advanced survival skills. At first, she thought it was simply because she had proven herself trustworthy by saving little Ayana from the flood. But she gradually realized there might be other reasons for his attention. He showed her how to track animals by reading signs that were invisible to untrained eyes. A bent twig here, a faint footprint there, the way grass lay differently where a deer had passed. Elena discovered she had a natural talent for this kind of observation, perhaps because her Irish grandfather had been a hunter who had taught her to notice small details in the forest. Ayana also taught her advanced techniques for finding water in the desert, something that could mean the difference between life and death in this harsh environment. He showed her which rocks held moisture, which plants indicated underground springs, and how to collect dew in the early morning hours when every drop was precious. But the most important lessons were about reading the landscape itself. Ayana taught Elena to see the mountains the way Apache people did, not as obstacles to overcome, but as allies that could provide protection, resources, and guidance. Every canyon and ridge had its own personality, its own gifts and dangers. The land speaks to those who know how to listen, he told her one afternoon as they stood on a high ridge overlooking the valley below. Your people hear only silence because they have forgotten how to be quiet inside themselves. Elena was struck by the truth of this observation. Even before her capture, her life had been filled with constant activity and noise. The Apache way of life required periods of stillness and contemplation that allowed a person to truly observe their surroundings and understand their place in the natural world. As her skills improved, Elena began to see changes in how the other Apache treated her. The men who had initially viewed her with suspicion now nodded respectfully when she passed. The women included her more naturally in their conversations and asked for her opinion on various matters. She was becoming part of the community rather than just a tolerated outsider. But this acceptance came with new challenges. Elena began to understand the desperate situation the Apache people faced. White settlers and soldiers were closing in on their traditional territories, forcing them into smaller and more isolated areas. The camp received regular reports from scouts about troop movements and new settlements being established in areas that had been Apache land for centuries. She learned about the history of conflict between her two peoples, the broken treaties, the massacres on both sides, the cycle of revenge that seemed impossible to break. Elena heard stories about Apache families destroyed by cavalry attacks, children taken from their parents and sent to distant schools where they were forbidden to speak their own language or practice their customs. These stories made Elena think about her own family's death in a new way. She had seen it as a senseless tragedy, which it certainly was, but she was beginning to understand that from the Apache perspective, it was part of a much larger struggle for survival. Her family had been innocents caught in a war they didn't fully understand, just as she was now. This knowledge created a conflict in Elena's heart. She couldn't forget or forgive what had happened to her family, but she was also growing to care about the Apache people who had welcomed her into their community. She saw their children playing and laughing, their elders sharing wisdom and stories, their warriors preparing to defend everything they held sacred. Ayana seemed to understand her internal struggle without her having to explain it. One evening, as they sat by the fire after the day's lessons, he spoke about his own losses. "I had a wife once," he said quietly, staring into the flames. "She was called Morning Star. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were killed by soldiers 3 winters ago while I was away hunting. The soldiers said they were looking for warriors, but they killed women and children instead." Elena felt her heart clench with sympathy and understanding. Here was someone who had lost everything just as she had. Someone who understood the pain of having your family torn away in an instant of violence. "How do you bear it?" she asked him, speaking in Apache now instead of English. "I fight for those who are still alive," he replied simply. "The dead are gone, but the living still need protection. My people need leaders who remember why we fight, not just leaders who know how to make war." This conversation marked a turning point in Elena's relationship with Ayana and with the Apache people in general. She began to see herself not just as a captive, or even as an adopted member of the tribe, but as someone who might have a unique role to play in the conflicts that were tearing the Southwest apart. Her knowledge of white customs and language made her valuable as an interpreter and advisor. But more than that, her presence in the camp represented something hopeful, the possibility that people from different cultures could learn to understand and respect each other, despite their differences. Elena started helping with negotiations. When other tribes sent representatives to discuss alliances or trade agreements, her ability to think like both an Apache and a white person gave her insights that pure-blooded members of either group might miss. She could anticipate how white officials might react to certain proposals, or explain Apache concerns in ways that other tribes could better understand. But perhaps most importantly, Elena was learning to see herself differently. The frightened girl who had been captured months ago was being replaced by a confident young woman who could survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. She could track game, find water, predict weather, and navigate through mountain terrain that would challenge experienced outdoorsmen. She was also developing a deep spiritual connection to the land that she had never experienced before. The Apache taught her to see the desert and mountains as living entities deserving of respect and reverence. She learned prayers of gratitude for the animals that gave their lives to feed the tribe, and ceremonies that honored the plants and minerals that provided tools and medicines. This spiritual awakening was perhaps the most profound change Elena experienced during her time in the mountains. She had been raised as a Catholic, but the formal rituals and distant God of her childhood seemed pale compared to the immediate, personal relationship with nature that Apache spirituality offered. As autumn deepened and the first snows began to dust the highest peaks, Elena realized she had become someone entirely new. She still remembered her old life and mourned her lost family, but she was no longer the same person who had hung laundry behind a cabin in the valley below. She had been transformed by hardship, challenge, and unexpected acceptance into someone stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined possible. Winter settled over the mountain camp like a heavy blanket, bringing challenges that tested everyone's survival skills. Elena had learned to prepare for the cold season the Apache way, but experiencing her first winter at this altitude was still a shock. The temperature dropped far below anything she had known in the valley, and snow often blocked the narrow paths between different parts of the canyon. During these long, cold months, the Apache people spent more time in their shelters, gathered around fires that provided both warmth and light. It was a time for storytelling, for sharing wisdom, and for strengthening the bonds that held the community together. Elena found herself drawn deeper into the cultural life of the tribe as she listened to ancient stories and learned traditional songs. Her relationship with Ayana had been evolving, gradually throughout the autumn, but the enforced closeness of winter brought them together in new ways. He began visiting Nayeli's shelter more often, officially to check on Elena's progress with various skills, but actually to spend time in her company. These visits never lasted long, and they were always properly chaperoned by the elderly woman, but Elena began to look forward to them with an anticipation that surprised her. Ayana would bring small gifts, a particularly beautiful feather he had found, a piece of turquoise with an unusual pattern, or some sweet berries he had discovered during his scouting trips. These offerings were always presented casually, as if they meant nothing special, but Elena recognized them for what they truly were, signs of growing affection and respect. Their conversations during these visits ranged over many topics. Ayana was curious about Elena's life before her capture, asking thoughtful questions about white customs and beliefs. He seemed particularly interested in her family's journey from Ireland to America, perhaps seeing parallels with his own people's struggles to maintain their identity in a changing world. In return, Elena learned more about Ayana's past and the responsibilities that weighed on his shoulders as a leader. He told her about his childhood training as a warrior, the spiritual visions that had guided his path, and the difficult decisions he faced every day to keep his people safe in an increasingly dangerous world. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fire with Nayeli dozing nearby, Ayana spoke more openly about his deceased wife and children than he ever had before. His voice was quiet and sad as he described Morningstar's gentle nature and the way his children had followed him around camp, eager to learn everything their father could teach them. "I thought my heart died with them," he admitted, speaking in Apache so that Elena could practice the language. "For 2 years I felt nothing but anger and the need for revenge. I became a man my wife would not have recognized, someone who lived only for war." Elena listened without interrupting, understanding that this was a sacred confidence he was sharing with her. She had seen glimpses of the pain he carried, but never the full depth of his grief and rage. "What changed?" she asked gently when he fell silent. Ayana looked at her across the fire, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. "You changed," he said simply. "Watching you learn our ways, seeing your courage and kindness, reminded me that there is still good in the world worth protecting. You brought light back into places that had been dark for too long." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes, though she wasn't sure if they were from sadness or joy. She had never expected to find love in this place, especially not with the man who had taken her from everything she had known. Yet somehow, despite the tragic circumstances that had brought them together, genuine affection had grown between them. But their growing closeness was not without complications. Elena was acutely aware that some members of the tribe disapproved of Ayana's interest in a white woman, especially during such dangerous times. She overheard conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached, and noticed the way certain people watched her when she and Ayana were together. The strongest opposition came from Cocheta, a fierce Apache woman who had been expected to become Ayana's second wife. She was beautiful, skilled in all the traditional arts, and came from a prominent family within the tribe. Many people had assumed she would eventually share Ayana's lodge and bear his children to continue his lineage. Cocheta made no secret of her displeasure with the attention Ayana paid to Elena. She found ways to criticize Elena's work, pointing out mistakes and suggesting that a true Apache woman would do things differently. Her comments were always phrased politely, but the underlying message was clear. Elena didn't belong here and never would. Elena tried not to let these challenges discourage her, but they weighed heavily on her mind. She began to question whether her feelings for Ayana were wise or fair to anyone involved. Was she being selfish to care for him when their relationship created problems for his leadership? Could she ever truly become Apache enough to be a suitable partner for their chief? These doubts came to a head during a particularly difficult week when the camp was running low on food. A hunting party had been away for many days with no success, and the stored supplies were nearly exhausted. Everyone was hungry and worried, making tempers short and patience thin. During this tense time, Elena made a serious mistake while preparing a meal. She misidentified a plant that Nayeli had taught her about, nearly adding something poisonous to the stew that would have made several people very sick. Fortunately, one of the other women caught the error before anyone was harmed, but the incident caused a great deal of upset. Cocheta seized on this mistake as proof that Elena could never be truly trusted with important responsibilities. She spoke loudly enough for others to hear about the dangers of allowing a white woman to handle Apache tasks, suggesting that Elena's presence was a threat to the entire community. Elena was devastated by her error and the criticism that followed. She felt like all the progress she had made over the past months was being erased by one careless moment. That night she lay awake wondering if she should ask Ayanna to take her back to white settlements, where she wouldn't be a burden or a source of conflict. But Ayanna surprised her the next morning by asking her to accompany him on a scouting mission to check on the hunting party. It was an honor usually reserved for experienced warriors, and it showed his continuing faith in her abilities despite the previous day's mistake. They rode out together into the snowy landscape, following tracks and signs that would lead them to the hunters. As they traveled, Ayanna spoke about leadership and the mistakes that every person must make in order to learn and grow. Even the best hunter sometimes misses his target, he told her. Even the wisest elder sometimes gives wrong advice. What matters is not avoiding all mistakes, but learning from them and not letting fear keep you from trying again. His words comforted Elena, but it was his actions that truly showed his feelings. When they finally found the hunting party, who had killed a large elk and were preparing to return to camp, Ayanna made sure that Elena received credit for helping to locate them. He praised her tracking skills and her knowledge of the terrain, making it clear that he valued her contributions. On the journey back to camp, riding through the beautiful winter landscape with the promise of food for their people, Elena realized that her feelings for Ayanna had deepened beyond mere attraction or gratitude. She had come to love not just the man, but everything he represented: strength tempered by wisdom, leadership guided by compassion, and the courage to hope for peace even in times of war. She also understood that he cared for her in the same way. It was evident in the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, in the gentle way he spoke to her, and in his willingness to defend her against criticism from his own people. The question now was whether their love could survive the challenges that lay ahead. Winter would end soon, bringing new dangers and decisions that would test everything they had built together. But as they rode through the snow-covered mountains with the promise of spring stirring in the distance, Elena allowed herself to hope that love might be stronger than all the forces trying to tear their two worlds apart. Spring arrived early that year, melting the snow faster than anyone expected and revealing a landscape that had changed during the long winter months. New settlements had appeared in the valleys below, and smoke from homesteaders' cabins could be seen rising from areas that had been empty wilderness just months before. The pressure on Apache lands was increasing, and everyone in the mountain camp could feel the tension building like storm clouds on the horizon. Colonel William Harrison had spent the winter months planning what he called his final solution to the Apache problem in the territory. He was a career military man who had fought in the Civil War and believed that the only way to bring peace to the Southwest was through overwhelming force. His orders from Washington were clear: capture or kill the Apache leaders and force the remaining tribe members onto designated reservations where they could be controlled and civilized. Harrison had been particularly interested in reports about a white woman living among the Apache. His informants had told him about Elena, describing her as either a captive being held against her will or a traitor who had joined the enemy. Either way, he saw her as a key to his campaign. If she was a captive, rescuing her would provide excellent publicity for his mission. If she had chosen to live with the Apache, her capture would demoralize the tribe and prove that even their supposed allies could be turned against them. Elena knew nothing about the colonel's specific plans, but she could sense the growing danger through the increased activity of Apache scouts and the worried conversations of the tribal elders. Ayanna had become more serious and distant in recent weeks, spending long hours in council meetings and often disappearing for days at a time on reconnaissance missions. The relationship between Elena and Ayanna had continued to deepen throughout the winter, though they had been careful to keep their growing affection private. The disapproval of some tribal members, particularly Cocheta and her supporters, made public displays of their feelings unwise. But in quiet moments, away from watching eyes, they had begun to speak of a possible future together. These conversations were complicated by the reality of their situation. Ayanna was not just any Apache man, but a war chief whose decisions affected the survival of his entire people. Any woman he chose as a wife would need to be someone who could help him lead, someone the tribe would respect and follow. Elena had won acceptance as a skilled member of the community, but becoming the leader's wife would require a level of cultural integration that she wasn't sure she could achieve. The crisis that would force Elena to choose between her old and new worlds began with the arrival of a stranger in the Apache camp. His name was Miguel Santos, and he was a Mexican trader who had been dealing with various Apache bands for many years. He brought news from the outside world, along with goods that the mountain people needed: metal tools, ammunition, and cloth that couldn't be made in the traditional way. Miguel also brought disturbing information about Colonel Harrison's plans. He had overheard conversations in the territorial capital about a major military operation planned for the spring. The colonel had assembled a large force of cavalry and infantry, along with Apache scouts from rival bands who had already been forced onto reservations. The plan was to surround the mountain strongholds and force the Free Apache to surrender or face annihilation. Even more troubling was Miguel's report about Elena herself. Word of the white woman living with the Apache had reached official circles, and she had become a symbol that both sides wanted to claim. The military saw her as either a victim to be rescued or a criminal to be punished. Some Apache groups viewed her as proof that their traditional enemies could be converted to their cause. "They speak of you in Santa Fe," Miguel told Elena privately. "Some say you are a saint who chose to live among the heathens to convert them. Others say you are a devil who has betrayed your own race. Either way, you have become more famous than you know." This news frightened Elena more than any physical danger she had faced. The idea of being used as a symbol by people who didn't know her or understand her situation was terrifying. She had made her choices based on survival, acceptance, and eventually love, not out of any grand political or religious motivation. The immediate danger became clear when Miguel revealed the most crucial piece of information he had learned. Colonel Harrison's attack would begin in just 2 weeks, time to catch the Apache when they were spread out in their spring hunting camps. The plan was to hit multiple locations simultaneously, preventing the different bands from coming to each other's aid. This intelligence gave Ayana and the other leaders time to prepare, but it also created an impossible decision for Elena. Miguel offered to take her away from the mountains before the attack began, providing safe passage to Mexican territory, where she could start a new life far from the conflict. It would be her last chance to escape before the military operation began. "Once the shooting starts," Miguel warned her, "there will be no safety for anyone caught between the two sides. The soldiers will see you as a traitor, and some Apache may blame you for bringing trouble to their people. Your best chance is to leave now before it's too late." Elena wrestled with this decision for days, unable to sleep or eat properly as she considered her options. Part of her was tempted by the offer of escape. She could leave the mountains, travel to a city where no one knew her story, and try to build some version of the life she might have had if her family had never been killed. But the larger part of her knew that running away was no longer possible. Too much had changed in the months she had lived with the Apache. These people had become her family, their struggles had become her struggles, and their leader had become the man she loved. She could no more abandon them than she could have abandoned her birth family. The moment of truth came when Elena accidentally overheard a conversation between 2 Apache scouts who had just returned from reconnaissance. They were reporting to Ayana about troop movements they had observed, describing the positions and numbers of soldiers gathering in the valleys below. One of them mentioned a specific location where Colonel Harrison had established his forward command post, along with details about the timing of the planned attack. Elena realized that this information could be crucial to the Apache defense, but she also understood something the scouts didn't. Based on her knowledge of military tactics learned from her father's stories about the Civil War, she could see that the colonel's apparent plan was actually a deception. The real attack would come from a different direction. Using the main force as a distraction while a smaller, elite unit moved in for the killing blow. She spent a sleepless night analyzing what she had heard, using her understanding of both Apache and white strategies to piece together the colonel's true intentions. By dawn, she was certain she had identified the real threat, but warning the Apache would mean fully committing herself to their side in a war that could only end in tragedy. For almost everyone involved, Elena found Ayana preparing for a council meeting with the other war leaders. She asked to speak with him privately, knowing that what she was about to do would change everything between them and make any return to white society impossible. "The attack you're preparing for is not the real attack," she told him, speaking urgently in Apache. "The soldiers want you to think they're coming from the south, but the real danger is from the north. They're counting on you to position your warriors in the wrong place." Ayanna listened intently as Elena explained her analysis of the military movements and tactics. Her insights made sense of several puzzling reports the scouts had brought back, and her knowledge of white military thinking provided a perspective that pure Apache strategy might have missed. "How can you be sure?" he asked, though she could see in his eyes that he already believed her. "Because it's what my father would have done," Elena replied. "He always said that the best way to defeat a superior force was to make them fight the battle you chose, not the one they expected." Ayanna nodded slowly, understanding the implications of Elena's warning. She had given him information that could save many Apache lives, but in doing so, she had crossed a line that would mark her forever as an enemy in the eyes of her own people. If any white settlers or soldiers learned that she had helped the Apache prepare for battle, she would be branded a traitor and face imprisonment or execution. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why risk everything to warn us?" Elena looked into his eyes and saw not just the Apache war chief, but the man she had come to love with her whole heart. "Because this is my family now," she said. "These mountains are my home. Your people are my people. I choose to stand with you whatever comes." Ayanna took her hands in his, and Elena felt the weight of her decision settling over her like a cloak. She had burned the bridges back to her old life, committing herself completely to the Apache cause and to the man who led them. There would be no going back now, no matter what the future might bring. The war council that followed was unlike any that had been held before, with Elena's strategic insights helping to shape Apache defensive plans in ways that combined traditional tactics with modern military thinking. As the leaders dispersed to prepare their warriors, Elena realized that she had become something entirely new. The days following Elena's warning were filled with intense preparation, as the Apache community transformed from a peaceful mountain settlement into a fortress ready for war. Warriors checked their weapons and prepared their horses while women and children gathered supplies and identified hiding places, in case the fighting reached the camp itself. Through it all, Elena worked alongside everyone else, her strategic insights having earned her a new level of respect even from those who had previously questioned her place among them. Ayanna had been deeply moved by Elena's decision to warn the tribe, understanding that she had sacrificed any chance of returning to white society in order to protect Apache lives. Her choice had proven something he had hoped but never dared to fully believe, that her loyalty to his people and to him was complete and unwavering. 3 days before Colonel Harrison's expected attack, Ayanna made a decision that surprised everyone in the camp, including Elena herself. He called for a gathering of all the adult members of the tribe and announced his intention to take Elena as his wife in a traditional Apache ceremony. The announcement created a stir of excitement, concern, and debate throughout the community. "Some will say this is not the time for celebration," Ayanna addressed the assembled crowd, speaking in the formal tone reserved for important tribal business. "Some will say we should wait until the danger has passed, but I believe there is no better time to affirm our commitment to life and to the future of our people. Elena has proven her loyalty with actions that could cost her everything. She has shown courage that would honor any Apache warrior. She has chosen us, and now I choose her." The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Many of the tribal members who had grown to respect Elena over the months cheered and expressed their support. Others, particularly Cocheta and her allies, remained visibly unhappy with the decision. But Nayeli, the respected elder who had become Elena's surrogate grandmother, stood and spoke in favor of the union. "This white woman has learned our ways better than some who were born to them," the old woman declared. "She has saved our children, warned us of danger, and proven that her heart beats with Apache blood. If our war chief sees fit to make her his wife, then she has my blessing." Elena was overwhelmed by the speed of events and the magnitude of what was being proposed. Marriage to Ayanna would make her not just an Apache wife, but the partner of a war chief during one of the most dangerous periods in tribal history. She would be expected to provide counsel and support, while also serving as an example to other women in the community. But more than the responsibilities, Elena was moved by what the proposal represented. In choosing to marry her now, with battle approaching and their survival uncertain, Ayana was making a statement about hope and faith in the future. He was saying that love and family mattered even in the darkest times, perhaps especially in the darkest times. The wedding ceremony was planned for the evening before the expected attack, giving the couple and the tribe a chance to celebrate life and unity before facing whatever the next day might bring. Traditional Apache marriages were typically elaborate affairs that could last for days, but the circumstances required a simpler ceremony that would still honor all the important customs and spiritual elements. Elena spent the day before her wedding learning the rituals and protocols she would need to follow. Nayeli and the other elder women taught her the traditional songs and prayers, explained the symbolic meanings of various ceremony elements, and helped her prepare the special clothing she would wear as an Apache bride. The wedding dress was a work of art created by the women of the tribe working together throughout the day. It was made of soft buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork and patterns that told the story of Elena's journey from captive to valued community member. Tiny shells and pieces of turquoise added color and spiritual significance, while fringe and feathers gave the dress movement and life. As the sun began to set behind the canyon walls, the entire tribe gathered in a circle around the central fire pit for the ceremony. Elena felt nervous but determined as she took her place beside Ayana, who wore traditional war chief regalia that emphasized his strength and authority while also honoring the spiritual nature of the occasion. The ceremony began with purification rituals that cleansed both bride and groom of their past lives and prepared them to begin fresh as a married couple. Elena was given a new Apache name, Itzel, meaning rainbow, to symbolize her role as a bridge between different worlds and her ability to bring beauty and hope even after storms. The tribal shaman, a weathered man named Nalnish, conducted the main portion of the ceremony. He spoke about the sacred nature of marriage as a partnership that strengthened not just the couple, but the entire community. He reminded everyone that love was a powerful force that could overcome differences and create harmony from conflict. Today we witness something that has never been seen before, Nalnish said, his voice carrying clearly through the evening air. A woman of one people choosing to become one of another people, not through conquest or force, but through love and understanding. This marriage shows us that the barriers between different tribes of humanity are not as strong as the connections that bind all hearts together. The vows Elena and Ayana exchanged were both traditional Apache promises and personal commitments they had crafted together. They promised to support each other through all challenges, to honor their respective strengths while accepting their weaknesses, and to work together for the good of their people and any children they might be blessed with. When Ayana took Elena's hands and spoke his vows, his voice was strong and clear. I take you as my wife, my partner, my equal in all things. What I have is yours, what you have is mine. Your enemies are my enemies, your family is my family, your dreams are my dreams. I will protect you with my life, and I will love you until the stars fall from the sky. Elena's response, given in fluent Apache that would have amazed anyone who had known her just months before, was equally heartfelt. I choose you and your people freely. With full knowledge of what that choice means, I give you my heart, my strength, my loyalty, and my future. I will stand beside you in war and in peace, in good times and in hardship. Your battles are my battles, your victories are my victories. Your children will be my children. The ceremony concluded with the sharing of sacred cornmeal and water, symbolizing the nourishment and life the couple would provide for each other and their community. As they ate and drank together, the entire tribe sang traditional songs of blessing and celebration. But even as the community celebrated this joyous occasion, everyone was aware of the approaching danger. Warriors kept their weapons close at hand, and scouts continued to arrive with reports about enemy troop movements. The marriage was a bright moment of hope and love surrounded by the darkness of impending conflict. After the formal ceremony ended, Elena and Ayana walked together to the lodge that would now be their shared home. It had been prepared by the women of the tribe with careful attention to both Apache traditions and practical necessities. Beautiful rugs covered the floor, and the walls were decorated with meaningful objects that represented the couple's journey together. As they sat together by their private fire on their wedding night, Elena marveled at how completely her life had changed. A year ago, she had been a settler's daughter with a simple future mapped out ahead of her. Now she was the wife of an Apache war chief, preparing to help lead her adopted people through one of the greatest challenges they had ever faced. Do you regret anything? Ayana asked her quietly, perhaps sensing her reflective mood. Elena considered the question seriously before answering. She thought about her lost family, her destroyed childhood home, and the safe life she might have lived if fate had been different. But then she looked at her husband, thought about the community that had accepted her, and felt the strength and purpose that had grown within her during her time in the mountains. "I regret that my family died," she said honestly. "I regret that our peoples are at war, and that good people on both sides will suffer because of it. But I don't regret the path that brought me here, to you, to this life. Everything I've lost has been balanced by everything I've found." Ayana smiled and pulled her close, and Elena felt a deep sense of peace despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring battle, danger, and possibly death. But tonight she was exactly where she belonged, with the man she loved, surrounded by people who had become her true family. Whatever the future might hold, she would face it as Itzel, the Apache wife of a war chief ready to protect everything she held dear. Dawn broke gray and ominous over the mountain camp on the morning after Elena and Ayana's wedding. The celebration had been brief but meaningful, giving the tribe a moment of joy before facing the storm that was rapidly approaching. Scouts had confirmed during the night that Colonel Harrison's forces were moving into position, and the attack would likely begin before the sun reached its peak. Elena woke in her new husband's arms, feeling a mixture of happiness and dread that reflected the strange circumstances of their situation. She had found love and acceptance in the most unexpected place, but now that love would be tested by forces beyond their control. As she lay listening to Ayana's steady breathing, she placed her hand on her stomach and wondered if the life growing there would survive to see the world they were fighting to protect. She had suspected her pregnancy for several weeks but had kept the knowledge to herself, uncertain how to share such momentous news during such dangerous times. The traditional signs were unmistakable to someone who had learned Apache ways of reading the body's messages, but Elena had wanted to be absolutely certain before telling anyone, even her husband. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had discovered new life within her just as death was approaching their doorstep. In Apache tradition, pregnancy was seen as a blessing from the spirits, a sign that the tribe's future was assured even in the darkest times. But Elena couldn't help worrying about bringing a child into a world torn by conflict and hatred. Ayana stirred beside her as the camp began to wake around them. Warriors were already moving through the settlement, making final preparations for the battle they knew was coming. Horses were being saddled, weapons were being checked one last time, and families were saying what might be their final farewells. "It's time," Ayana said quietly, his voice heavy with the responsibility of leadership. He had slept little during the night, his mind occupied with strategies and contingencies, always aware that the decisions he made in the coming hours would determine whether his people lived or died. Elena sat up and took his hand, knowing that she needed to tell him about the pregnancy before he rode out to face whatever dangers lay ahead. If something happened to either of them during the battle, she wanted him to know about the new life they had created together. "Before you go," she said softly, switching to Apache so that her words would carry the full weight of their cultural meaning, "there is something you must know. The spirits have blessed our union already. I carry your child." Ayana's eyes widened with surprise and then filled with an emotion so deep that Elena felt tears spring to her own eyes. In that moment, she saw not the fierce war chief who struck fear into his enemies, but simply a man who had lost his first family and never dared hope he might have another chance at fatherhood. "Are you certain?" he asked, though she could tell from his expression that he already believed her. "As certain as the sunrise," Elena replied, using a traditional Apache phrase that meant absolute truth. "The child will come with the winter snows." Ayana pulled her close and held her tightly, and Elena felt him trembling slightly with the magnitude of this news. A baby represented hope for the future, but it also meant another life to protect in an already dangerous world. The timing couldn't have been more challenging. Yet Elena knew that Apache people believed children came when the spirits determined they were needed most. "This changes everything," Ayana whispered against her hair. "No," Elena said firmly, pulling back to look into his eyes. "This changes nothing about what we must do today. Our child will need a world worth living in, which means we must fight for it. But it changes everything about what we're fighting for." Ayana nodded, understanding her meaning. They were no longer just protecting their current community, but ensuring that future generations would have a chance to experience the freedom and cultural richness that defined Apache life. The baby growing within Elena was a symbol of hope that transcended the immediate conflict, but there was no time for extended celebration or planning. The sound of gunfire echoing from the valley below announced that Colonel Harrison's attack had begun. The first phase of the battle was unfolding exactly as Elena's strategic analysis had predicted, with a diversionary force engaging Apache positions in the south, while the main attack prepared to strike from the north. Ayanna quickly dressed in his war gear and went to coordinate the tribal response. Elena's warning had allowed the Apache to position their warriors more effectively, but they were still vastly outnumbered and outgunned by the military force arrayed against them. Their only advantages were intimate knowledge of the terrain and the element of surprise provided by Elena's intelligence about the enemy's true plans. Elena wanted to join the fighting, but Ayanna and the tribal elders had agreed that she was too valuable to risk in direct combat. Her knowledge of military tactics and her ability to anticipate the enemy's moves made her more useful as a strategic advisor than as another warrior with a rifle. She would remain in the protected center of the camp, helping to coordinate the defense and care for the wounded. The battle began in earnest as Colonel Harrison's main force moved up the hidden canyon approach that Elena had identified. Apache warriors were waiting for them in concealed positions among the rocks, turning the narrow passage into a deadly trap. The soldiers found themselves caught in crossfire from above, unable to advance or retreat effectively. But the colonel was an experienced officer who adapted quickly to unexpected situations. When his frontal assault stalled, he ordered his men to pull back and began probing for other routes into the Apache stronghold. The fighting became a deadly game of chess played across the mountainous terrain, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other. Elena worked frantically throughout the day, using her understanding of both Apache and military tactics to help anticipate the enemy's moves. She coordinated messages between different groups of warriors, analyzed reports from scouts, and helped Ayanna make critical decisions about where to commit their limited forces. As the sun reached its peak, the fighting intensified. The colonel had brought Apache scouts from rival tribes who knew the mountains almost as well as Ayanna's people. These turncoat warriors guided military units through secret paths that threatened to outflank the defenders. Elena realized that the battle was becoming more desperate with each passing hour. The turning point came when a group of soldiers managed to work their way around to a position overlooking the main camp. From there, they could pour rifle fire down into the settlement, where women, children, and elders were sheltering. Elena saw immediately that this position had to be eliminated, or the entire community would be slaughtered. Without waiting for orders or permission, Elena grabbed a rifle and began moving toward the threatened flank. Her pregnancy was still in its early stages, not yet affecting her mobility or strength, and her months of mountain living had made her an excellent climber and tracker. She knew she could reach the soldiers' position using paths that were too narrow and treacherous for large military units. Ayanna tried to stop her when he realized what she was doing, but Elena was already gone, moving like a shadow through the rocks and brush. She had learned stealth from Apache warriors and hunting skills from her father's stories, creating a unique combination of abilities that served her well in this desperate situation. The climb to reach the soldiers' position was harrowing, requiring Elena to navigate cliff faces and narrow ledges while staying hidden from enemy sentries. Several times she nearly fell, saved only by her growing familiarity with the mountain terrain and her determination to protect her adopted family and unborn child. When she finally reached a point where she could see the soldiers threatening the camp, Elena realized she faced an impossible choice. There were too many enemies for her to fight alone, but their position gave them a commanding view of the entire Apache settlement. If they weren't stopped, the massacre of innocents would begin within minutes. Elena made a decision that combined desperation with tactical brilliance. Instead of trying to fight the soldiers directly, she used her rifle to trigger a rock slide that buried their position and blocked their line of sight to the camp below. The avalanche she created was far larger than she had intended, roaring down the mountainside like an angry spirit and changing the entire landscape of the battlefield. The rock slide not only eliminated the immediate threat to the camp but also blocked several routes the military had been using to maneuver their forces. Colonel Harrison found his units scattered and unable to support each other effectively, while the Apache defenders maintained their advantages of position and local knowledge. As Elena made her way back toward the camp, she felt a deep satisfaction mixed with worry about the risk she had taken. The baby she carried had been exposed to danger, but the alternative would have been certain death for many innocent people. She touched her stomach gently and whispered an Apache prayer, asking the spirits to protect the new life within her. The battle continued into the evening, but the tide had clearly turned in the Apache's favor. Colonel Harrison, seeing that his surprise attack had failed and that his forces were taking heavy casualties, began planning an organized withdrawal. 6 months after the battle that had tested everything Elena and Ayanna held dear, winter returned to the mountains with unusual gentleness. The snow fell softly rather than in the fierce storms that typically marked the season, as if nature itself was providing a peaceful setting for the new life about to enter the world. Elena's pregnancy had progressed without complications, supported by the knowledge and care of Apache women who understood the sacred nature of bringing children into the tribe. The victory over Colonel Harrison's forces had given the Apache community precious time to prepare for the future, but everyone understood that their respite was temporary. More soldiers would come eventually, and the pressure to surrender to reservation life would only increase. Many tribal councils had been held throughout the autumn to discuss their options, with Elena's insights helping to shape plans that balanced practical survival with cultural preservation. The decision had been made to relocate deeper into Mexico, following ancient trails that would take them to places where the reach of American military forces was limited. It would mean leaving the sacred mountains that had been their home, but it offered the best chance for maintaining their freedom and traditional ways of life. Elena had supported this difficult choice, understanding that sometimes survival required accepting painful changes. As her time approached, Elena found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. The frightened girl who had been captured over a year ago seemed like a different person entirely, someone from a distant dream rather than her own past. She had been transformed by hardship, love, and the profound experience of becoming truly part of another culture. Nayeli, now Elena's closest confidant and surrogate grandmother, had been preparing for the birth with the thoroughness that Apache culture demanded for such sacred occasions. Traditional medicines had been gathered, prayers had been offered to ensure a safe delivery, and the other women of the tribe had created beautiful blankets and clothing for the expected child. "This baby will be special," Nayeli told Elena one evening as they sat by the fire. The old woman's weathered hands gentle as she felt the movement of the child within Elena's swollen belly. Born of two worlds, blessed by spirits from both peoples, coming at a time when the tribe needs hope most of all. Elena hoped the elder woman was right, but she also worried about the challenges her child would face. Mixed-blood children often struggled to find acceptance in either of their parent cultures, caught between worlds that didn't always welcome those who bridged different traditions. She was determined to raise her child with pride in both their Apache and European heritage, but she knew the path ahead would not be easy. The birth began on a night when the aurora danced across the winter sky in brilliant sheets of green and gold light. Apache tradition held that children born under the northern lights would be blessed with special gifts of wisdom and courage, able to see paths that others might miss. Elena hoped this was a good omen as she labored through the night with Nayeli and the other experienced women attending her. Ayanna waited outside the birthing lodge with the other men, following custom but clearly anxious about his wife's welfare. He had already lost one family to violence, and the thought of losing Elena or their child filled him with fears he struggled to control. The sounds from within the lodge told him that the birth was progressing normally, but he wouldn't feel relief until he could see his family safe and healthy. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pink and gold, Elena's cries reached a crescendo and then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever before being broken by the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. But Nayeli's surprised exclamation made everyone realize that something unexpected was happening. "Twins," the old woman called out joyfully. "The spirits have blessed us with twins." Elena's exhaustion was forgotten in the wonder of discovering she had given birth to not one child, but two. The first baby, a son, had arrived just as the sun touched the eastern peaks. The second, a daughter, followed minutes later as the light spread across the valley below. According to Apache belief, children born at sunrise were destined for leadership and great deeds. When Ayanna was finally allowed to enter the lodge and meet his children, Elena saw tears of joy streaming down his face. He held each baby with infinite tenderness, whispering Apache blessings and promises of protection. The son would be called Nalnish, meaning, he works, while the daughter would be named Ayanna after her father, as was traditional when a chief's first daughter was born. The twins were perfect examples of their mixed heritage, with features that blended Elena's European ancestry and Ayanna's Apache bloodline. Their skin was a beautiful golden color that seemed to glow in the firelight, and their eyes held intelligence that seemed far beyond their minutes of life. Elena felt overwhelmed with love and hope as she held her children for the first time. The birth of twins to the war chief and his white wife was seen by the entire tribe as a powerful sign for the future. These children represented the possibility of unity between different peoples, living proof that love could create beauty from conflict. The celebration that followed lasted for 3 days, with every member of the community contributing gifts and blessings for the new family. But even in the midst of joy, practical concerns had to be addressed. Reports from scouts indicated that new military expeditions were being organized, and the pressure on Apache lands was increasing steadily. The planned relocation to Mexico would need to begin soon, preferably before Elena and the babies were strong enough to travel, but while the winter weather still provided some protection from pursuit, Elena's recovery from childbirth was faster than expected, aided by her excellent physical condition and the expert care of the Apache women. Within 2 weeks, she was strong enough to travel, though the thought of taking newborn babies on such a dangerous journey filled her with anxiety. Nayeli assured her that Apache children were born to travel and that the twins would adapt to life on the trail better than she feared. The final preparations for leaving the mountains were emotionally difficult for everyone involved. This canyon had been home to Ayanna's band for many generations, holding sacred sites and ancestral graves that would have to be left behind. Elena watched her husband struggle with the decision, understanding that leading his people away from their homeland was one of the hardest things he would ever have to do. "We're not abandoning our heritage," Elena told him one evening as they prepared for the journey ahead. "We're carrying it with us to plant in new ground. Our children will learn Apache ways wherever we go, and they'll pass those traditions on to their own children someday." The departure from the mountain stronghold took place on a clear, cold morning in late winter. Nearly 100 Apache men, women, and children formed a long caravan that wound its way through secret passes toward the Mexican border. Elena rode carefully, carrying one twin while Ayanna carried the other, both parents constantly alert for signs of danger. The journey south was long and difficult, requiring the travelers to avoid settled areas and military patrols, while navigating challenging terrain with limited supplies. But Elena's strategic knowledge helped them choose routes that minimized risk, and her understanding of both cultures proved valuable when they encountered Mexican authorities who might have been hostile to Apache refugees. After 6 weeks of travel, the band finally reached a remote valley deep in the Sierra Madre Mountains where they could establish a new settlement. The location offered many of the same advantages as their former home: defensible positions, reliable water, and abundant game, while being far enough from major population centers to avoid unwanted attention. As Elena stood on a ridge overlooking their new home, holding her sleeping daughter while Ayanna carried their son, she felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with such tragedy and loss had led to this moment of hope and new beginnings. Her children would grow up free, learning the best of both their cultural heritages while creating something entirely new. "What will you teach them about where they came from?" Ayanna asked, watching the sunset paint the Mexican mountains in brilliant colors. "I'll teach them that they are the children of two worlds," Elena replied, speaking in the mixture of Apache and English that had become their private language. "I'll tell them that their Irish grandmother sang lullabies about green hills and misty mornings, and that their Apache grandfather could track a deer through solid rock. I'll teach them that love can bridge any distance, overcome any difference, and create beauty from the most impossible circumstances." Years later, when Elena's hair had begun to show silver threads and her children had grown into strong, capable young adults. She would often sit on that same ridge and remember the girl she had been before fate changed everything. Elena McCarthy seemed like a character from a story someone else had told her, while Itzel, the Apache wife and mother, felt like her true self. Her twins had indeed grown up to be remarkable young people who moved easily between different worlds. Young Nalnish spoke 4 languages fluently, and had inherited his father's tactical brilliance along with his mother's gift for seeing patterns that others missed.